Cruising on into Peppermill on a Thursday morning, a Christmas Day release of this vlog. By the way, Christmas Day, one of 3 days of the year where I just don't play any poker out of general principle. Christmas Day, Thanksgiving Day, and my birthday, I just always have looked at it as, look, I have to spend those days with friends and family. Have to devote that time to that. Will not play any poker on those days. But as we cruise on in here, on the penultimate vlog of the year, I was actually thinking back, and I told my girlfriend Anna this story of how your perspective so often changes over the years. Those of you that have been with this vlog know that I used to have a golden retriever named Leo, who I love dearly, and I ended up losing custody of Leo for a variety of reasons when I got divorced in 2020. And my life has been amazing since then. I'm not complaining, but not having Leo is just this one painful thing that always jumps out to me. Back when we got Leo in 2016, it came right around the time of Super Bowl 50. And I am a huge Super Bowl history fan, as some of you may know. And right around that time, my dad had gotten me as a birthday present this awesome Super Bowl history book for Super Bowl 50. All these great photos and things from over the years. And it was this book that I had just left out on the coffee table, as it's kind of intended to be. And there was one day where Leo had been left alone in the living room. And I walked back in there, and Leo had ripped the hell out of this book. Teeth marks all over the cover, a page ripped out. And I just remember being so mad at him that moment. I was just thinking, you could have literally destroyed any other book I own and I wouldn't have cared, but you had to pick this one. I was just furious at this dog. I yelled at him. Well, you know, you fast forward all these years, and I'll be sitting around my condo, and that book just sits up on the shelf, and I'll look over at it sometimes. And I think, man, what I wouldn't give to have Leo here eating this book right now. You know, your perspective just shifts. And that's what comes to mind when I think of this year in poker. I set out with the simple goal of making more money than I would have made last year and the year before, and that is not going to happen this year. There was a chance where it looked like it was certainly going to happen, but after a colossally disappointing second half of the year, that will not be the case. But if you had told me a decade ago that I would ever make as much money as I made this year playing poker, I would have been ecstatic with that result. So your perspective changes over time on a number of different topics, and that is the case this year. But again, I'll tell you more about that coming up in our final vlog of 2023. But we have one more to do today. Let's see if we can't make a little bit of a dent in the disappointment that has been the second half of this year in a 0-5-10 game at Peppermill. I would come into this session trying to forget about a hand that had taken place the previous day. There are really only two guys, as I've talked about over the years, that would be considered pros who play in our game on a regular basis. And since their names both start with the same letter, I like to refer to them as the Double Ds. Now, they haven't been around much of late, but one of them made his return on Wednesday. This hand would take place against him. It would come when the pro would open to 35 under the gun and another would call. I have pocket kings on the button and make it 150. Both waste absolutely no time making the call. So with 455 in, the flop is 6-5-5 rainbow, and it gets checked over to me. Now, both of these players are capable of showing up here with much weaker hands than I'd necessarily want to think that they could have. And certainly in the case of the pro, he'll be able to fold hands like pocket eights and pocket nines fairly easily against me if I were to bet on a board like that. So with a combination of pot control and deception in mind, I check back this flop. The turn rolls off what I figured was a beautiful card for me. Another 5, giving me a full house. Under the gun now leads out for 300 here, and the other guy instantly mucks. Now, obviously, I'm not folding. And the thought of raising against such a tough opponent isn't something I like either. So that leaves but one option, and I make this call. So with 1,055 in, the river is an ace, which obviously I hate. But he then checks. Now, against a lot of guys, I'd value bet fives full of kings in this spot, but not against a player like this who is always capable of being incredibly tricky. Though I'll admit, I really thought he was just giving up when that ace came out. I check back and he says, "Oh, I have you, make no mistake." And I then started wondering how the hell he could end up with a 5, but he had the other thing that I didn't consider, but considering the way he runs against me should not be a shock: pocket sixes. I'm not saying that I'm the better player, but he has had an amazing run of luck against me over the years, which to his credit, he has admitted to on multiple occasions, and this was just the latest example on a day in which I turned a $700 win into a $500 loss, which always stings. As for this Thursday at Peppermill, we would get an OMC heavy lineup early on. You knew the game wasn't great when a player would limp in from the cutoff and fold when I made it 40. Something that only seems to happen when you have pocket aces. And that, of course, would be the only time on the day I would look down at that hand. One guarantee in poker is that after you make it 40 with aces and get no action, you'll get 4 callers when you make the same bet with King 10, which happened here when I opened from under the gun +1 position. So with 160 in, the board would come out King Jack 4 Rainbow. I'd bet 65 here, and my only caller, and I say this as a compliment because I love this movie, is a guy who resembles Johnny Utah. And with 290 in, the turn is an 8, and I bet 100. This time he tosses his hand into the muck. That wouldn't be the case minutes later, as vlog correspondent Bugsy would channel his inner Bodie and battle Utah when he would jump out of a plane without a parachute, holding 4-5 of clubs against Bugsy's pocket jacks, the latter of which would hold up, though it wasn't without a sweat. The game would then prove just how OMC heavy it was, as 2 guys get all in, and they both have pocket aces. This is a mid-session update. If you've watched this vlog, then you may know that the hand at 6-4 now means you're cruising, due to the legendary Eazy-E lyric. So I've decided that if I ever lose a hand when I am cruising, I want it to be to pocket deuces, so I can then play this.
The silly motherfucker pulls out a deuce deuce.
And that's the end of the update. After that, 2 hours would go by and I would not have a single playable hand. Perhaps that was why I would then proceed to call with ace king and call 140 more from a player that seemed to be on tilt. But after flopping nothing, I would relinquish the hand only to leave myself wondering what would have happened if I'd just gone all in pre-flop. Another hour of completely unplayable hands would go by, and I would add on a hockey puck. And then, as you can see, every player dealt into this next hand limps in. I have 3-4 middle position 2 and simply over limp. With 60 in, we go 3 ways to Jack 10-8 all diamonds, giving me a flush. Big blind actually checks here. Under the gun, bets 20, and +1 calls him. I raise 5x, making it 100. Amazingly, the player in the big blind cold calls the 100 here, and the other 2 who had put money in the pot both muck. So with 300 in, the turn is the 5 of hearts, which is a really good turn card for me. Big blind checks, and I bet 2/3 of the pot here, making it 200, knowing that he will likely call quite a bit with what I assume is a draw like the ace of diamonds. Get this. He then announces to the table that he has a really good draw.
Beautiful draw here.
After we said that, I assumed that that was going to be followed by a fold. As I'm sure most of you will see, 98% of the time, that is what happens in spots like that. But he ends up making the call. So with 700 in, I am simply asking the dealer, no diamond, no diamond, no diamond, and the river is a diamond. So he's announced that he has a draw. The draw has come in. And now you are going to have to take my word on this next part. This is not a guy who is just going to say that when in fact he was already there. That's not the kind of guy he is. He would consider that dishonorable. and I've known him for years. I feel pretty confident in that read. By the way, a very successful doctor. Anyway, he ends up checking this river to me, which I also found weird, now that the draw has gotten there. So I can't figure out what the hell is going on. I have a sneaking suspicion I know what some of you are going to say I should have done in this spot, and whether or not that would have worked is something I'll never know, but I would simply check back this river, and he would table not the ace of diamonds, he would table 6-9 offsuit with the 9 of diamonds for the win. One of the most bizarre pots I've played in a while, simply adds to what was already an extremely frustrating stretch of poker. A couple hands later, I'd raise pocket jacks getting one caller. We'd get a flop of queen, queen 6, which I would bet and proceed to get called with an ace coming on the turn. My opponent would bet $75 into me there, and I'd make that call. The river would come out a complete brick, and he would jam all in for about 400 or so. It felt like a spot where, and a player that, could be bluffing. But I didn't want to put that theory to the test, and I simply mucked the jacks in that spot. The lineup already sucked, including one guy who has decided that he's now going to be grinding this game for 8 hours a day, every day, with $300 in front of him, playing only aces, kings, and sets. And then we actually had an open seat, and there were 2 guys on the list that are guys that give action. Neither one of them would show up. And the single tightest player in our player pool who had admitted that after grinding 1-2 for a number of hours, he was this close to going home, he's the guy that gets the seat, and the game goes from terrible to about as bad as it's ever been in the history of the Peppermill Poker Room. So, when I looked up on the screen and saw my Vegas Golden Knights getting set to take on the Tampa Bay Lightning for a 4 p.m. start, I would announce to the table that I am booking a loss and no one can stop me, and sure enough, no one did. All right, wrapping things up, booking a $1,020 loss, the double whammy. Running lousy in a game that's lousy, which is too bad, because there were a couple of guys yesterday that were giving a lot of action, and it's one of those situations where when they were here yesterday, I was rooting for them to win, because that would mean they'd be back today. You'll notice there's a lot of players who that is one of the most reliable things. If they win the day before, they're back the next day, and vice versa. So that session kind of fitting to wrap up this year. Even though we still have one more vlog, it's like whatever can go wrong will go wrong. I know a lot of people are going to say that it should have been obvious that he had the 9 in that hand, and that if I jam the river, he folds. Maybe he folds. You'll find that oftentimes when guys draw to their hands and actually finally make something, they don't love the idea of folding. It could have gone either way if I had successfully turned that 4-high flush into a bluff in that spot and tried it. It might have worked, but I'm not really that convinced. And he could have just as easily been saying that with the ace. All right, I would like to preface the following segment by saying that you really don't need to watch it, but I'm just trying to work through this in my head to understand what has happened here. If you've been watching this vlog, it was back in August when this hand took place. It was that ridiculous hand where I had the ace-6. Dustin, the member of the Double Ds, had raised early position with 8-6 offsuit and had flopped a straight. And I go ahead to turn a straight as well, just not as big, in a spot where I end up not being able to get away because it just seemed impossible for him to have that one hand that beat me. And he's going to have the same hand so many times, or a bluff, that it's absolutely ridiculous. The funny part is, I don't believe I had played a single hand against him because he'd been out of town, thankfully for me, apparently, for several months, or at least has been playing at Lake Tahoe. So the very next hand that I play against the guy, he happens to call 150 pre-flop with pocket 6s and flop a full house against me when I have kings. I mean, is this real life? I feel like I'm living in a simulation against this guy. And again, obviously, I'm not saying I'm the better player. He's the better player. I admit that. But the amount of luck that has gone his way against me is just beyond imagination over the years. These are just two examples. This has continued on. I've won one big pot against him in my life, and it wasn't because I coolered him. It was because he chose the wrong pot to bluff at me against when I happened to have a set. And again, I'm not taking a shot at him. I could not like him more as a person and hate playing against him more as a poker player. So those two dynamics are both at play. It's just ridiculous at this point how good he has run against me, and I wish I could run that good against anyone in the world of poker. So, if you'll excuse this rant, I'm going to go effort one winning vlog next week to wrap up 2023.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey.